Welcome everybody. We're here today to talk about establishing industry partnerships. And I have someone from the research portfolio joining me today to talk about intellectual property. But as I say, she did give me her slides, so I could speak to that if she doesn't make it today. The government's National Innovation and Science Agenda will change funding incentives so that more university funding is allocated to research that is done in partnership with industry. Today we will briefly talk about the resources available to help you identify industry partners and what to consider when establishing partnerships. To ensure you can apply your research to industry, it is useful to have an audience in mind from the very start. If you are not aware of Fast Track Impact yet, make a note of them now. Fast Track Impact is an international training company working in the higher education research and innovation sectors. They were founded in 2015 through the UK Research Council funding. They have fantastic resources. They publish a blog, run weekly podcasts, and run a 5-week course on research impact that comes highly recommended. You can also follow them on Twitter and Facebook, and I recommend that you do that. They produced this really useful stakeholder analysis template. It's a tool to help you identify a potential audience. It will help you work through the questions: what is my audience struggling with? What are their biggest obstacles? What do they care about? What is in it for them? How does my research answer their questions? Ultimately, that is the important question to ask. We have resources here at the library that will also help you to identify potential industry partners. The first one is Swirled. This is a database containing over 500 industry reports consisting of key statistics and analysis on market characteristics, performance and major industry participants. It looks at the competitive landscape, outlook and challenges faced by industry. You can search by keyword, for example, beer, for the beer industry, or click on the two categories, Australian industry reports or Australian specialised industry reports. That specifically looks at emerging markets. Factiva is another useful resource when it comes to finding industry information. The Australian Financial Review in particular is the leading authority on news regarding industry in Australia. You can use Factiva to search by keyword within this resource. You can also follow the Australian Financial Review on Twitter, and I do recommend that you do that. It provides you with critique and analysis of events and issues, identifying challenges and opportunities within industry. The Academic Liaison Librarians for Business has created a subject guide that helps you find information on companies and industry. And you can find this resource on the University Library website. Potential partners do not just include commercial organisations. Eligible industry partners for ARC linkage grants are private companies, charities or not-for-profit agencies, and also government agencies. And you can see there that you're eligible to find an overseas organisation, and you can also have more than one partner. The ARC actually publishes their data sets, and one of the data sets, you can see a couple of lines down under partner organisations, will give you a list of the partner organisations that has been involved in the linkage grants since 2002. It was last updated in May of 2016, so it is quite recent information. These organisations have partnered with researchers in the past and might be more open to a proposal. Our community.com.au is a directory of community and not-for-profit groups in Australia and can be used to identify community partners. There are also websites detailing grants available for community organisations. Just do a search for Community Grants Australia. One such site is called Grant Guru, but there are quite a few available. After consulting these databases and directories, you might have an idea of who would be interested in your research. But then what? Now the hard work starts, because really when it comes to developing industry partnerships, it's all about building a relationship. And if any of you have ever been in a relationship, you know that it's hard work. Build on opportunities for further research highlighted in consultancies or smaller research projects. Joining established academic industry partnerships is always a good idea. Cold calling, how hard it might sound, it's still your best option out there if you want to establish a new contact. Use conferences, associations and professional bodies to network. A small advertisement, for example, for a university research partner was spotted in an industry magazine, which led to a really successful partnership. Put your work out there on social media channels preferred by industry. Attention gained through widespread dissemination of your own research through talks, media and publications gains interest from potential partners. Write an opinion piece on LinkedIn, for example. I know of someone who was working in industry management for aged care actually, and the mining industry contacted her because of the work that she made available on LinkedIn, because they have a lot of accidents that they have to manage in the mining industry. Publish in the conversation, where a journalist will help you translate your research for a non-academic audience. And if you haven't heard of the conversation yet, please go and have a look at that on the internet. I don't have time today to go into any detail, but if you want any further information on anything that I've mentioned here today, please contact your academic liaison librarian at the library and they will give you more information. But the conversation is a really good resource because it is a very well-established resource in Australia where your work as a researcher gets translated for the general public. It's important to remember when you write the concepts, keep your audience in mind, make it relevant to them, always solve their problems. Just what not to do, just as important as what to do. The following is based on real industry partner problems identified during linkage partnerships reported by Jenny Wilson, the Strategic Development Manager at Griffith Institute for Social and Behavioural Research. The time from submission to start of the project can be an issue for organisations. They are, of course, more time critical than us in academia. Researcher objectives not compatible with industry. Long-term project and relationship needs a budget commitment, so that is always something to consider for organisations. The research team going off on a tangent. The researcher wanting to publish something that might not put the organisation in a positive light. The researcher or team not delivering what was expected or promised in the first discussions. The researcher or the team passing on confidential or personal details. The researcher or team not reporting or discussing problems. Or the researcher or the team changing. Often the people who originally started a project might not be there by the commencement of it, And that does cause some issues for organisations. So keeping this in mind, it's not all bad news. Every funding approach is an exercise in trust. It's important to show why the project is important, demonstrate that the researcher or team has sufficient expertise to undertake the project, demonstrate the proposal or project offers a credible way that the problem could be addressed. When you are discussing your project ideas with an organisation, be prepared for it to be modified, because you need to take their ideas into consideration as well. There are some great existing examples. If all of this sounds like too hard to even make a start with, the UK is a little bit ahead of us. They introduced the Research Excellence Framework in 2014, the new system for assessing the quality of research in the UK. It was the first time that impact of research outside of academia was assessed, and they used case studies to assess this impact. They've published this database that you can actually go and search. As you can see, you can just pop a keyword in there and look for your particular area that you are studying in. And it provides you with quite detailed information on the pathways that people took to establish impact and to establish partnerships with organisations. They have also started publishing analysis of these case studies. This is an example. It's an analysis that was done using over 2,500 case studies in social sciences. It identifies pathways including contributing to the government by submitting a report, participating in an inquiry or a panel, establishing a registered charity or an organisation or a network, developing online resources. I know that there's one of our academics here at the University of Sydney working in the area of educational psychology that is busy producing a website to really get the community involved in the work that they are doing. These are all ways to help establish you as an expert and for organisations outside of academia to take note of your work. And as I already said, if you have any questions regarding any of the resources that I mentioned here today, please contact the library because they will be able to give you more information. Intellectual property can be the source of some confusion and occasionally quite significant issues when dealing with industry partners. I recently attended a workshop on creating industry partners that was run by the business school, and the guy that presented that said that for people who have established relationship with industry, one of the biggest issues is around ownership and this idea of intellectual property. And there's some huge fight going on around this. People have ended up in court having to fight about this. So it is good for you to think about and also make very clear before you get involved in this relationship to clarify who owns what, especially when it comes to the raw data.
My name is Anna Noonan. I'm the Business Development Manager for Arts and Social Sciences. So I do a little bit of intellectual property work, but I do a lot of industry partnerships and engagement. Okay. It's nice to meet you too.
Yes.
So the thing about intellectual property is, particularly when working with industry, is intellectual property has a dollar figure often attached to it, particularly if behind that intellectual property has this potential commercial value. So if whatever you're creating within that research collaboration may constitute a new invention that becomes patented, and that of course ends up entering into the world of people buying licenses to use your products that wouldn't have existed without the research that you've done collaboratively, who gets the money, where does the money go. So there's a couple of things that I think are really important about intellectual property. Is anyone a student here? And so the interesting thing about the University of Sydney's intellectual property policy, which is online, is that students have retained their own intellectual property, which means that academics and members of staff of the university, their intellectual property is assigned to the University of Sydney, which means that it doesn't mean that it doesn't belong to them necessarily in terms of being attributed, but it actually belongs to the University of Sydney. And so if you were to go through the process of registering your intellectual property as an invention or wanting to patent it, then the university does that for you with your name and its name, if that makes sense. If you're a student, it actually belongs to you. And if you are working on a grant, say a linkage, as a postdoc or even as an undergrad, that sometimes happens, you would usually be asked through the research office to assign your intellectual property to the university so the university can manage that grant as a whole, so that academics and students alike, so that everybody is under the same umbrella. The really tricky thing, as Mary would have been talking about here, is trying to work out what's background IP and what's IP generated by the research collaboration that you've been involved with. And that's background IP from both sides. So that is where your industry partner, once you have one, might have information and intellectual property that they bring to the table, which is the basis of the research. You similarly might have your own disciplinary expertise that you bring to the table as well. And so it can be quite a tricky thing to manage, because you can imagine when the collaboration happens and it's exciting and you come up with something really exciting through your research, trying to then determine who owns what part of that research can become really complicated. So the way that we do this is it's really clearly set out in the intellectual property policy that the university has, who gets what. And the recommendation is that you go through the process with your partners in sorting this out before you even begin the research. And so it's usually, I think it's a 30 split. So say you had, the intellectual property policy is quite clear, and it does stipulate, I think it's 250,000, is it? If you, for example, create some kind of invention that is patented and goes on, and say you create something for, I don't know, Rio Tinto, which is some mental health wellbeing app that has some extraordinary new invention component to it, and you patent that, and Rio Tinto says, thanks very much, we'd like to charge for this, or this, we're going to buy the patent, and we're going to buy rights to use this, and we're going to roll it out all over the world, and people are going to pay for using it. The first $250,000, so I understand, goes to the inventors. So I'm going a little bit further away from talking about
that's all interesting.
In the first instance. So there's quite a lot of dollar figure attached to it down the line, particularly if you're thinking about engaging with a commercial industry partner. Less so if you're thinking about partnering with perhaps a government agency or a not-for-profit or a gallery or museum or library or archive or something, because they don't necessarily have that same direct link to commercial output. But I would recommend having a look at the intellectual property policy, which is online, available. It's available to academics, and it should be in fact available to students, but I don't know in terms of the intranet whether everybody accesses the same document. But it's one of those questions that can be quite tricky to negotiate, particularly if you're wanting to partner with an organisation that does have very strong opinions about what background IP has been brought to the table. And that's where, obviously not America, she's not here, but each faculty within the research portfolio is a unit called the Commercial Development and Industry Partnerships Unit. So that's where I belong. And our job is to manage this with you. So you need to be really, really clear when working with your partners when you start that collaboration, what belongs to you, what belongs to them, how you're going to share it, what the outputs are going to be, how you're going to decide whatever comes out of the research, which you might not know at the beginning who's going to own it. So it's one of those really kind of tedious, admin-y type conversations that you need to have at very early stage, but really important in terms of managing possible problems that can eventuate. particularly when something really exciting might eventuate from the research and everybody wants to have ownership of it. But rest assured, particularly if you're a staff member, that our unit within the university, within the research portfolio, we have an intellectual property officer and we have patent attorneys. So they're lawyers who look at all of the applications. So maybe I'll wind back there. If you think that you've come up with something that is really exciting in terms of intellectual property, I mean, of course, there's things like copyright and trademarking and design registrations that are not formally registered with the Australian Patent Office. And then there are things, then there's patents. And so the first step is that you, when you have this shared intellectual property, you would have already worked out with your partner who owns what, but you submit what's called a record of invention. And that's a form that you can download from the intranet. And that's a form where you have to prove that this is something that's totally new. This is new intellectual property in Australia and in fact in the world. And it constitutes something novel and innovative beyond what already exists out there. So you've actually taken whatever it is that you're researching to kind of some next level. It then gets registered and the little flag goes in the sand. So once that happens, if anyone else happens to come up with the exact same research a week later, yours is in the sand, so actually it belongs to us. We did this first. It then goes through a whole lot of legal and administrative kind of processes, and if it constitutes a patent, then it will become a patent, it will get a patent number, and it will sit basically in a family of intellectual property where it's a new patent in that family. So it can be quite complicated, and particularly if you don't work in the land where patents are that common, so arts and social sciences and education, social work, those kind of areas where I work in that patents are not really a massive thing. It can be quite daunting, but we're here, and I think, so this is the page about intellectual property, and you'll see that the recommendation is that you get advice from the Office of General Counsel, but I'd also encourage you to contact through your research manager or whomever your liaison, or your academic liaison with the library, to make sure that you just have all your T's crossed and I's dotted. Do you have any questions? Do you know how to work out what constitutes your IP? Like how do you know whether you have intellectual property? Background intellectual property? Does anyone have an example who might know? No? Okay. So through your work as an academic or as a student, if you have come up with new ideas through your research and your learning, and you have written about them and they belong to you as opposed to you quoting other people in essays or you writing a comparative analysis about two other people's opinions. If these are your ideas and they're new and they're obviously informed by your learning and your research of others, but they're actually something new, then that's like intellectual property. That belongs to you. That means that no one else can copy that and publish it and say it belongs to them. So if you think about intellectual property in the way you might think about plagiarism as the kind of opposite spectrum, is that if you come up with something, if someone were to come up with and it's unique to you, and someone can come up with the identical thing and claim it as theirs, that's your intellectual property. That makes sense?
Yep.
And so I can't give a kind of concrete example, I suppose, because intellectual property is enormous. But you can see up here there are different types of intellectual property. So I would just recommend that you check out copyright, trademarks, confidential information, then you see patents, plant breeders' rights is pretty specific. So for example, there's a PhD student at the University of Melbourne, I think, who has come up with something, an alternative to antibiotics. And that's kind of patent gold, right? So someone who's got a PhD student has come up with something that works better than and is an alternative to antibiotics. So that you can imagine at the University of Melbourne, I can't remember which one, the patent lawyers, everyone will be going completely bananas to make sure everything's registered, the forms are in, the record of invention is in, because that's the kind of really pointy end where you're looking at squillions and squillions of dollars for the university and for that PhD student, if in fact they assigned their IP to the university. If they didn't, then that IP and all the money that belongs to them could potentially belong to that student, which I doubt would happen. The only last thing that I'll mention if you are a student, and particularly if you're a high degree researcher, is when you are thinking about your intellectual property, it tends to always be, we recommend you have a conversation with your supervisor about background IP, your IP, because a lot of your research might be quite heavily informed by your supervisors and their ideas and recommendations to you. So that's another kind of random tip, or something that we come across quite often is, or even if you're an academic and you're working in a co-researcher environment in different disciplines, is not just having that conversation with the industry partner, but also with your other researcher partners to make sure that everybody agrees that everyone has had their own intellectual property articulated. Yeah.
And so just in terms of CEDA,
Yeah.
what...
There you go, there's the policy at the top.
Yeah, I think you can click on there as
Yeah.
well. What is it that you guys provide assistance with, and who have access to that? Is it students as well as established researchers?
That's a good question. So we sit within the research portfolio, so we do everything to do with research. So we don't do student learning stuff, if that makes sense, unless it's research. And I don't mean research for an assignment. I mean research as in you're a PhD student, you're a postdoc, you're an undergraduate student doing some kind of established research project, probably with an academic or a postdoc or whatever. So there's a couple of different things that we do. We help manage all of your engagement with industry partners if you need that. So that might be having conversations. So there's a couple of different ways. You might be going in on a grant scheme together, a linkage scheme or other. It might be through commissioned research where the industry partner comes to you and says, we want you to do some research for us. So negotiating the terms of that commissioned research or consultancy as it usually becomes. So that would be things like what happens if they're paying for it, 100%. Do they actually buy the IP from us? Is that part of the deal? How much money is it worth? What recognition do you have as academic researchers? What if they don't want to attribute it to you? What if they want to own it all themselves? All of those kinds of things the team can help with. Obviously the records of invention, so submitting those forms and managing the legal side of that for you. And my role, or the business development managers, is we try and help you find industry partners, or if you've got an industry partner, have those really difficult conversations about money and IP with you, rather than you. Part of our role is recognising that you are academics and students, and that's your area of expertise, and don't need to suddenly become a jack of all trades to know everything about patent law and about IP and about all that kind of stuff. But we turn up often in meetings with your industry partner and have conversations about what kind of contracts and all of the terms of the contract. So kind of like a stepping stone before we go to a legal review, say.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was interesting, we don't have time for that now, but when I went to the industry partnership workshop, the guy who was running it asked everybody to take their research and turn it into a question that someone from industry or a community group might need an answer to. And people had real difficulty doing that. They kept just restating their research question. So I would say, go away today and do that exercise. Think about how you can turn your research into a question that a community group or an industry partner might be interested in resolving. And you can use some of the resources I mentioned today to go and do a little bit of background research on industries and on areas within industries that's growing and that has that's emerging, to be able to do that exercise. But I would really encourage you to do that, because I was quite surprised at how difficult established researchers found that exercise. Do you have any other questions?
Actually, one thing that I'm not sure if it's the same seminar, but someone who's an expert in this said, your first meeting as a researcher with an industry partner should be 99% listening. So you turn up as the researcher expert and you should actually just listen to what they want and what problems they need to solve, as opposed to telling them how great your research is. And I think that that's something that people find quite, but a really good tip.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending this talk today. And please contact us and let us know if you have any questions. If we don't have the answer for you, we will endeavour to find the person who do have the answer for you. Thanks.